According to the authors of Critical Thinking in Psychology, Robert J. Steinberg et al. From the Cambridge University Press, logical fallacies are misconceptions that stem from a flaw in logical reasoning. In other words, a logical fallacy happens when a faulty argument is presented as a solid argument. We will be discussing 7 logical fallacies and how to avoid them.
Non-Sequitur.
According to a paper titled What Incompleteness Arguments Are and What They Are Not by Massimiliano Vignolo from the Ratio Journal, a non-sequitur fallacy is when the conclusion is not logically related to the premise. This basically just means the premise, or the original idea, has absolutely no relationship with the conclusion, the final idea. This is one of the easier fallacies to point out, because most examples are glaringly obvious. Take this example for instance. My sandwich fell today, so the entire world is collapsing beneath my feet. The premise, my sandwich fell today, and the conclusion, so the entire world is collapsing beneath my feet, have absolutely no relationship. Any argument where the premise does not correlate with the conclusion is probably a non-sequitur argument.
An ad hominem argument attacks the person instead of the information presented. Instead of presenting an argument, the person responding to the original statement uses a personal attack or insult to distract the audience from the point at hand. Ad hominem arguments are common in political debates because it's an easy, albeit cheap and dirty way to discredit your opponent's argument. Yuri Leibowitz, in a paper titled Moral Deliberation and Ad Hominem Fallacies from the Journal of Moral Philosophy, brings up a famous Peter Singer work that asserts that everyone should donate to famine relief. When Professor Leibowitz brings this up to students, the common response is, does Singer donate? While this may be a valid question, Leibowitz says that it is a prime example of an ad hominem fallacy. It doesn't matter if Singer does or does not donate to relief. Singer is still allowed to argue that people should.
Admiral, we have enemy ships in Sector 47. It's a trap.
When we try to derail someone from an argument by distracting this person with other non-relevant information, this is called a red herring fallacy. This is not to be confused with the non-sequitur argument, which, as stated earlier, is an argument that doesn't follow a logical conclusion. A red herring derails the audience, while a non-sequitur derails the speaker. A red herring style argument is very popular when the speaker either doesn't know the answer to the question or doesn't particularly want to answer the question. These are particularly popular in debates when the moderator asks a difficult question and the debaters want to skirt around the answer. According to a paper written by Stephen A. Contakes of Westmont College, red herring fallacies can bring up a topic that is easier to argue against. A simple example of a red herring fallacy is, why don't you eat all of your food? Don't you know that there are starving children in Africa? Unlike some more difficult instances, this is clearly a red herring fallacy because it does try and derail the listener by implying that the starving children in Africa would somehow be affected by the plate of unfinished food, when that is clearly irrelevant in the argument.
You're either with us or you're with the enemy. That's clear. I will continue to make that clear.
Also known as the oversimplification or black and white fallacy, this argument presents the issue as biconditional. The speaker presents only 2 solutions, when in reality there are many. Most arguments where 2 options are presented and one is clearly presented as good and the other as evil normally fall under the either-or fallacy. Sometimes things are presented as opposites when they are actually not necessarily mutually exclusive. One can happen at the same time as the other. A very popular example is either you're with us or you're against us. This doesn't work because it's very likely that they are somewhere in between.
Don't let this slide. We got what they call a slippery slope. You know what a slippery slope is?
Do it got anything to do with skiing?
According to Douglas and Walton of the Oxford University Press, a slippery slope fallacy is when an action is taken and disastrous consequences are assumed. Simply, a slippery slope fallacy implies that once something is done, there will be many consequences to follow. This is a dangerous one, because it looks to be non-fallacious on the surface, but once inspected more closely, it's easy to break the argument apart. According to Walton, a slippery slope argument can sometimes be used correctly, but more often than not, they are in fact fallacious. An example of a slippery slope fallacy is saying if gay marriage gets legalized, we're setting a precedent for legalization of bestiality. While on the surface this might look sound, there is no proof to back up the conclusion of the claim, making it a fallacy.
You made a hasty generalization, Robin. It's a bad habit to just get into.
Hasty generalization fallacy is making a broad judgment based on a small sample size. There are 2 common reasons for using this fallacy: not having done enough research and trying to scare the audience into believing something that is simply not the case. The first reason can lead to arguments that are inherently fallacious because there's an obvious lack of real, concrete evidence. An example would be, I smoked cigarettes for my entire life and never got cancer. Therefore, cigarettes don't cause cancer. We know that cigarettes do in fact cause cancer, but due to the sample size of one speaker, came to the conclusion that they do not. The other reason is it's purposely used as a scare tactic. An example would be if someone said, "A man wearing a hood stole my wallet, therefore anyone wearing a hood is a thief."
A bandwagon argument is a fallacy that tries to make the audience decide on something just because of its popularity. Just because something is popular doesn't mean it's the best. The bandwagon fallacy is used a lot in advertising because it's easy to build the credibility of a brand when many people are saying that it's a good product. According to a paper titled A Recommendation Model Using the Bandwagon Effect for E-Marketing Purposes in Internet of Things, from the International Journal of Distributed Sensor Networks by Sang-Min Choi et al., the more people that buy a product, the more popular it will be. This is called the bandwagon effect. While a product might in fact be the best product out there, just because it's popular does not mean that it is inherently the best product. An example would be, Tom, everyone knows that global warming is real. You shouldn't believe otherwise, and while this might be true, the popularity of the idea is not what makes it inherently truthful.